So we've established that there's a clear contradiction between the Qur'an and the Gospel, the Qur'an and the Torah. One might retort, this is impossible. Even if you don't believe in Allah, if you don't believe the Qur'an is divinely revealed, they surely wouldn't have produced a Qur'an, the writers of the Qur'an, which would result in a flagrant contradiction with books which they would have known contained teachings which contradicted the Qur'an, the deity of Christ and so on. So it must be there's some other explanation. Well, actually, no, you can rationally understand how this can happen if you disabuse yourself of the version of history that the Muslims have given us, and worse, themselves, for over 1,000 years. Essentially, you've got the problem of this. The information about early Islam only comes down to us from writings produced 200 to 300 years after the events they purport to describe. The most important collection of writings is the Hadith, the traditions of al-Bukhari, collected by al-Bukhari, 200 years after Muhammad died. And the rest are long after that, or some, not long, but some years after that, and there are traditions which go long after that. Many traditions which are far too far distant from the events they purport to describe. What we have, on the other hand, are some data which are close to the time that Muhammad is purported to have lived as the great prophet of Arabia. We have coins. Now, Islam is a religion which abhors images. It would not allow a depiction of Muhammad or any of the prophets. And yet we find Islamic leaders like Muawiyah putting, and this Muawiyah came after Ali, who's one of the rightly guided caliphs. Muawiyah has coins which contain crosses on them. If you know anything about Islam, you know the cross is abhorred. Jesus is going to come back and break the cross. Jesus did not die on the cross, but only seemed to. Further, on coins from the same period, you have images of Jesus holding a flaming sword. What are they doing there? An image, not just an image, but an image of Jesus, not Muhammad. You have questions as to why, when it says in the Qur'an, in the lifetime of Muhammad, that the direction of prayer was changed from Jerusalem to Mecca, why the early mosques have a direction of prayer which is towards Petra and not Mecca, not Jerusalem. And why only later on in the 8th century AD do you have a uniformity, eventually a uniformity of direction of prayer towards Mecca? You have early writings by Christians who are bearing the brunt of the Islamic attacks, but they're not Islamic, of course, this is the thing, of the Arab, Saracen, Ishmaelite, Haggarine attacks. These Christians are not describing Muslims. They don't refer to Islam, don't refer to Muslim. In the invasion of Spain by the Arabs in 711, there are Catholics who are meeting, bishops who are meeting, not discussing a religion called Islam. It's all very vague, the religion of these Arab invaders. And this is really surprising, because if you know anything about Catholic bishops in the early centuries, they were precise in describing heresies. But here, there seems to be an amorphous set of beliefs held by the Arab invaders. That's the reality. This was a monotheistic, broadly speaking, monotheistic religion. and the Arabs carried it wherever they went. It embraced Christians who were willing to be flexible about Jesus' nature. It embraced Jews who were willing to be flexible about Muhammad as a prophet. It's only later on that it becomes much more exclusive and the boundaries are clearly defined. And that's in that period of evolution, the Qur'an is being produced and gradually canonized. And that's why you can see the happy references to Christians going to the Injil, the Gospel, and Jews going to the Torah. And a happy concord between these groups with the Muslims. All their books are fine. But also an ignorance by the Arabs. Did I call them Muslims just then? I apologise if I did, because they weren't. These Arabs have an ignorance, though, about what's really in at least in the Gospel, possibly the Torah as well, in detail. And that actually is possibly because you have, amongst the Arabs, there is not a New Testament translated into Arabic, even at the time of Muhammad. So there'll be documents around, lectionaries, maybe other writings by Christians of various sorts. But there doesn't have to be a great knowledge in any detail about what is in the Injil. What we do know is that the Eastern Roman Empire was Catholic, and it was not playing footsie with what we call heretics. And so many would leave the empire's boundaries and they would go into zones just outside the empire, like Arabia. So there was a ferment of heresy at this time, and that's an ideal place for ill-conceived ideas about Jesus to arise and to find their way into the Qur'an, but also to allow a possible bridge of belief, a commonality to arise between Arabs who have a version of Jesus which is not the Catholic version, and Jews who reject Christ in his Catholic understanding, a kind of an acceptance of Jesus as a prophet, a great prophet, more than a prophet, because in the Qur'an, Jesus is a spirit from Allah. Now that's another phase of Islamic thinking, perhaps the earliest phase of their thinking, because here Jesus is clearly more than a man if he's a spirit from Allah. He pre-exists then. And as he's from Allah, no angel is called as being from Allah. No angel is described that way. Is there a kind of Arianism, homoousios here, of similar substance to Allah? But of course, there's the areas of the Qur'an which speak of him as being a man only. So one can see an evolutionary process in the Qur'an itself. And that explains why the Islamic dilemma arose. The Islamic dilemma explains how Islam is false, because of the logical contradiction. And what we can see about Islam as an evolving religion shows that it's false.